For 25 years, Sarah Mitchell had perfected the art of being invisible in Millbrook, Montana. Small-town librarian, quiet smile, predictable routine. What the town didn't know was that the woman checking out their books had once eliminated targets in 12 different countries. Welcome to Untold Legends. Before we begin this powerful tale of hidden identities and buried secrets, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers. Sarah Mitchell arrived in Millbrook on a Tuesday in March 1999. She drove a sensible Honda Civic, carried 2 suitcases, and had exactly $50,000 in cash sewn into the lining of her winter coat. The town of 2,847 people welcomed her with the casual indifference reserved for newcomers who seemed harmless enough. She rented the small apartment above Henderson's hardware store, applied for the assistant librarian position at the Millbrook Public Library, and began the most difficult mission of her life, learning how to be ordinary. The woman who had once infiltrated the Kremlin during the Cold War now spent her days shelving romance novels and helping teenagers with their homework. The operative who had extracted diplomats from war zones now handled overdue book fines with patient politeness. Elena Vasquez, the ghost who had shaped international politics from the shadows, was dead. Sarah Mitchell was born in her place. For the first year, every instinct screamed at her to run. When old Mr. Peterson approached too quickly at the reference desk, her hand moved instinctively toward the concealed knife in her cardigan. When teenagers whispered in the back corner, she found herself analyzing their body language for signs of threat. Sleep came in 2-hour intervals, broken by nightmares of faces she'd left behind in unmarked graves. But gradually, impossibly, Millbrook began to feel like home. The predictable rhythm of small-town life became a meditation. Story hour with kindergartners replaced briefings with handlers. Garden club meetings substituted for dead drops in foreign capitals. Sarah learned to measure success not in completed missions, but in helping Mrs. Kowalski find the perfect mystery novel or watching shy Tommy Barnes gain confidence through the summer reading program. By year 5, Sarah had become invisible in the best possible way. She was part of the community's fabric, reliable, helpful, unremarkable. She volunteered at the annual Harvest Festival, never missed a church potluck, and somehow always knew exactly which book would change someone's life. "That Mitchell woman's got the touch," old Henry Kowalski would say at the barbershop, recommended me a book about fly fishing that changed my whole approach to the river. What Henry didn't know was that Sarah had spent 3 years in Scotland learning to read water patterns while tracking an arms dealer through the Highlands. Her book recommendations weren't intuition, they were intelligence gathering perfected on 6 continents. She dated occasionally, carefully choosing men who were nice enough to provide cover, but boring enough not to ask probing questions. She volunteered just enough to seem civic-minded, but not enough to draw attention. Her modest salary was supplemented by careful investments made under multiple identities, creating the illusion of frugal living supported by a small inheritance from a fictional aunt. The hardest part wasn't maintaining the deception. It was learning to care about things that once would have seemed trivial. When the library's budget was cut, Sarah found herself genuinely upset. When young Amy Kowalski was diagnosed with leukemia, Sarah cried real tears. When the high school football team made it to state championships, she cheered with authentic pride. Elena Vasquez had been a weapon. Sarah Mitchell was becoming human. Year 15 brought the first real test. A new family moved to town, the Dimitris, claiming to be refugees from Yugoslavia. Sarah's trained eye spotted the inconsistencies immediately. Shoes too expensive for their supposed background, calloused hands that suggested weapons training, and a dialect that placed them from Serbia, not the region they claimed to be fleeing. For weeks, she watched them carefully while checking out their children's books and making small talk about adjusting to American life. Their cover story was good, but not perfect. Too many small details that didn't quite align. Sarah's instincts screamed that they were operatives, but for whom? And why were they here? The answer came during a seemingly innocent conversation at the grocery store. Elena Dimitri mentioned missing the cherry blossoms in Bratislava, a detail that would escape most people but set off alarms in Sarah's trained mind. Bratislava had cherry trees, but not the variety Elena described. She was thinking of Moscow. That night, Sarah broke protocol for the first time in 15 years. Using equipment hidden in her apartment's false wall, she made contact with her old handler, Marcus Webb. The conversation was brief, encrypted, and terrifying. "Vasquez, is that you? We thought you were dead." "I am dead. Stay that way." "There's been chatter. Someone's been asking questions about the Belgrade operation. Your operation." The line went silent for 30 seconds. Then, "How many know?" "We're not sure." "But Elena, if they've found you." Sarah disconnected the call and systematically destroyed the communication equipment. For the first time in 15 years, she reached for the go bag hidden behind her bedroom wall. Inside, 3 passports, $100,000 in various currencies, and weapons she'd hoped never to touch again. But as she held the items that could give her a new life, Sarah realized something that surprised her. She didn't want to run. Millbrook wasn't just her cover anymore. It was her home. The test came 3 days later in the form of Sheriff Dan Morrison, a good man who'd become something close to a friend over the years. He stopped by the library after hours, finding Sarah organizing returns in the fiction section. "Sarah, we need to talk. It's about the Dmitri family." Sarah's blood went cold, but her expression remained calm. "Oh? Are their children having trouble with their library cards?" "Nothing like that. FBI came through today asking questions. Seems there might be more to that family than meets the eye." Sheriff Morrison studied her face carefully. "Funny thing is, Agent Rodriguez mentioned they were looking into anyone who might have shown unusual interest in the family. Said someone with your background might have noticed things others wouldn't." Sarah continued shelving books, her movements steady despite her racing pulse. "My background, Dan? I'm a librarian." "Are you, Sarah?" "Because Agent Rodriguez showed me some photos. Old surveillance photos from the Balkans in the 90s. Woman in one of them looked an awful lot like you." The book in Sarah's hand, ironically a John le Carré novel, suddenly felt heavy as lead. 25 years of carefully constructed life hung in the balance of her next words. "That's quite an imagination, Dan, though I suppose we librarians do tend to look alike after a while." Sheriff Morrison stepped closer, his hand resting casually near his service weapon. "Agent Rodriguez wants to have a conversation with you, officially." Sarah turned to face him, and for just a moment, Sheriff Morrison saw something in her eyes that made him understand why Agent Rodriguez had been so insistent about speaking with her. There was a depth there, a hardness, that no amount of small-town living could completely erase. "When?" she asked simply. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the station." Sarah nodded and returned to her books. "I'll be there." After Morrison left, Sarah stood alone in the library she'd grown to love, surrounded by thousands of stories of people who'd found second chances and new beginnings. She had 12 hours to decide whether Sarah Mitchell would walk into that sheriff's station or whether Elena Vasquez would disappear into the night one final time. Sarah spent that night walking the empty streets of Millbrook, seeing the town through the eyes of both women she'd been. Elena Vasquez evaluated escape routes, identified potential surveillance, and calculated odds of successful extraction. Sarah Mitchell said goodbye to the coffee shop where she'd spent countless mornings, the park where she'd watched children grow up, the houses of people who'd become family. At 3 a.m., she found herself at the library, using her key to enter the building that had been her sanctuary for 25 years. In the silence between the stacks, she made her choice. Elena Vasquez was done running. The next morning, Sarah Mitchell walked into the sheriff's station at exactly 9 a.m., carrying a worn leather portfolio. Agent Rodriguez was younger than she had expected, with the earnest intensity of someone who believed catching bad guys would make the world safer. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming in. I'm Agent Rodriguez, FBI. I have some questions about your interactions with the Dmitri family." Sarah sat down and placed the portfolio on the table between them. "Before we begin, Agent Rodriguez, I have something to show you." She opened the portfolio and withdrew a single document, a presidential pardon dated 25 years ago, bearing seals and signatures that made Rodriguez's eyes widen. "My name," Sarah said quietly, "was Elena Vasquez. And before you ask any more questions, you need to call your director." What followed was 6 hours of phone calls, encrypted communications, and very nervous federal agents. The director of the FBI personally authorized a secure video conference. The deputy director of the CIA joined the call. And slowly, carefully, the truth began to emerge. Elena Vasquez had been one of the agency's most effective operatives during the final years of the Cold War. The Belgrade operation that had attracted attention involved stopping a weapons deal that would have armed 3 different terrorist organizations. She'd eliminated 7 hostile operatives and prevented what intelligence agencies later calculated would have been thousands of civilian deaths. But the operation had gone sideways. Elena's cover was blown, her extraction compromised. Officially, she died in the explosion that destroyed the warehouse where the weapons were stored. Unofficially, she'd escaped, and the agency had made a difficult decision. Let Elena Vasquez stay dead and give the woman behind the legend a chance at the normal life she'd never been allowed to have. The pardon was insurance, explained Director Hayes via secure video link, in case this day ever came. Agent Rodriguez, who'd started the day thinking he was investigating a small-town librarian, now found himself in the presence of a living legend. "Ma'am, the Dimitri family are Serbian intelligence," Sarah finished calmly. "Probably here to confirm whether Elena Vasquez is really dead. They've been watching me for 3 weeks. "And are you?" "Dead, I mean." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 25 years, there was steel behind it. "That depends entirely on what they decide to do next." The attack came that night, as Sarah had known it would. 3 men, professionals, entering her apartment through the fire escape while she pretended to sleep. They moved quietly, but not quietly enough for someone who'd spent decades listening for footsteps that meant death. Sarah's apartment had been carefully prepared for this possibility. Hidden weapons, reinforced doors, and escape routes planned to the second. But she'd also made another preparation. Sheriff Morrison's deputies were positioned in unmarked cars around the building, and Agent Rodriguez was monitoring from a surveillance van 3 blocks away. The men who came for Elena Vasquez found Sarah Mitchell instead, a woman who'd spent 25 years learning to care about people worth protecting. The confrontation was brief, decisive, and recorded by 6 different surveillance devices. When it was over, 2 operatives were in custody, and 1 was dead. Sarah sat on her apartment steps, wrapped in a blanket, talking to Agent Rodriguez as paramedics checked the minor cuts on her hands. "Will you have to relocate again?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah looked around at the town she'd called home for half her life. Neighbors were gathering at a respectful distance, worried faces illuminated by flashing emergency lights. Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store had brought her a thermos of coffee. Young Tommy Barnes, now a college sophomore, was asking his father in a loud whisper if Miss Mitchell was okay. "No," Sarah said finally. "I think Elena Vasquez has been dead long enough." The story broke 3 days later, not through official channels, but through something more powerful: small-town gossip. Sheriff Morrison, bound by federal classifications, couldn't tell the whole truth, but he could tell people that their librarian was a hero who'd helped stop some very bad people. The details grew in the telling, as details do. By the end of the week, Sarah Mitchell had either single-handedly ended the Cold War or was secretly the president's sister. The truth was both more mundane and more extraordinary. She was simply a woman who'd served her country, paid her price, and earned her peace. The library board held an emergency meeting to discuss whether having a former CIA operative as head librarian posed any liability issues. The vote was unanimous. Sarah Mitchell could keep her job as long as she wanted it, because anyone who'd kept the library running smoothly for 25 years had earned their trust completely. On Monday morning, Sarah returned to work to find flowers on her desk, cards from patrons, and a line of people waiting to check out books. Mrs. Kowalski was first in line, holding a mystery novel and grinning widely. "Heard you had some excitement this weekend, dear." "A little," Sarah admitted. "Well, I imagine you could recommend some good spy novels now." Sarah laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the truth had come out. "I think I might know a few good ones." Agent Rodriguez visited the library a month later, officially to close out his case files. but really to check on the woman who'd redefined his understanding of what it meant to serve. "Any regrets?" he asked as Sarah helped him research federal law for a case he was working on. "About which part?" "Any of it. The life you gave up, the years in hiding, the choice to stay." Sarah considered the question while she pulled books from the legal section. Around them, the library hummed with its usual afternoon activity. Teenagers pretended to study while flirting, elderly patrons dozed in the comfortable chairs, and young mothers read picture books to toddlers who would rather eat the pages. "I used to think," Sarah said slowly, "that Elena Vasquez was the real person and Sarah Mitchell was just a cover story. But I was wrong. Elena was the mask. This, helping people find the information they need, being part of a community, caring about whether the high school drama club has enough funding. This is who I really am." She handed him a book on federal surveillance law, then paused. "Agent Rodriguez, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you first became an agent, did you think you'd be saving the world by stopping master criminals and international conspiracies?" "Every day," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Most of the time, saving the world looks a lot more ordinary than we think. It looks like choosing to be kind when you could be cruel, helping when you could ignore, building something good in whatever corner of the world you find yourself in." Agent Rodriguez left that day with his books and a new understanding of heroism. Sarah Mitchell returned to her desk, where young Amy Kowalski, now in remission and applying to colleges, waited for help with her scholarship essays. 5 years later, the Millbrook Public Library was featured in Library Journal as one of the most innovative small-town libraries in America. Under Sarah Mitchell's leadership, it had become not just a place for books, but a community center, literacy program, and safe haven for anyone who needed information, guidance, or simply a quiet place to exist. The article mentioned that the head librarian had an unusual background in crisis management, but didn't elaborate. The people of Millbrook knew their librarian was special, but they'd always known that. Now they just understood why. Sarah kept the article in her desk drawer next to a photo from the library's 25th anniversary celebration under her leadership. In the picture, she's surrounded by 3 generations of patrons, children she'd taught to read, teenagers she'd helped through difficult times, adults who'd found new directions through books she'd recommended. Elena Vasquez had protected national security for 15 years. Sarah Mitchell had been protecting something even more important for 25. The idea that ordinary kindness, sustained over time, was the most revolutionary act of all. Visitors to the library sometimes noticed that their unassuming head librarian moved with unusual grace, that her eyes seemed to see everything, and that she had an uncanny ability to recommend exactly the right book for exactly the right moment. But mostly they noticed that she cared about their stories, all of them. From the smallest child learning to sound out words to the oldest patron researching their family history. In the end, Sarah's greatest mission wasn't the one that earned her a presidential pardon. It was the one that earned her something more valuable, a life worth living, surrounded by people worth protecting, in a place where the most dangerous thing she faced most days was running out of coffee during the morning rush. Sometimes the most powerful secrets aren't the ones that could bring down governments. Sometimes they're the ones that build up communities. One conversation, one book recommendation, one act of quiet service at a time. The woman who had once been Elena Vasquez, master spy, ghost operative, weapon of the state, had found her true calling in the most unlikely place, behind a circulation desk in small-town Montana, proving every day that ordinary heroes don't need to save the world to change it. They just need to show up, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of helping someone find exactly what they're looking for.